All right, people. Sorry about the longness of this. All right, the other point I resent is the way the issue is being presented to the American people. Same applies today. We are being edged into the war without the masses' knowledge. We have the anomalous situation of the polls showing a majority of the people favoring a course that is bound to get us into the war, while the same poll shows 86% of the same people oppose actual entry into the war. That shows that the minds of the people are confused. Next section, how wars are sold to us. Many of my hearers were adults at the time of the previous war and were familiar with the propaganda that led up to that war. Bernays, Edward Bernays, you can thank him for that, Froude's little nephew. If you want to know the history of that propaganda and its falsity, read a book of Sir Philip Gibbs with the title of Now It Can Be Told, in which he admitted the outrageous lies that were perpetrated on the American public. They did it once. You don't think they'll do it again? And Sir Philip Gibbs was no German but the leading English war correspondent knighted by his king. The London Economist, in a recent issue, said it was only a question of time until American public opinion could be brought to the point where we would actively enter the war. I believe a majority of the people who are advocating aid short of war do not desire us to enter the war. But there are others who do desire us to enter the war, who are taking the necessary steps to prepare the American people for active participation. We would enter it tomorrow if they dared, who are today in practical alliance with England, and unfortunately, they are the people who are shaping our national policy today, even still in this day. If not them, they're cronies. They're apostles here. You hear in Washington today that we are now in the war. You hear predictions from men and men who ought to know that we will actively enter the war within 60 days after the election. The American people should think this matter through. The American people should think this matter through. Even today's issues, you need to think them through. Don't let your emotions and your blind bias, which has been fed by lies to lead you by your nose, like you're a little putz. Think for yourself. That's why I'm reading these from 1940. They still apply today. You break my heart, people. I'm sorry. The American people should think this matter through. The course we are pursuing is bound to involve us in the war. You cannot play with fire and not get burned. You cannot have your government, not private manufacturers, transfer its equipment to foreign powers. You cannot have your government in an unofficial alliance with a foreign power. You cannot be a meddler in Indochina, berate Italy and Germany without eventually involving the nation in war. And if war comes, I venture to predict that we will repeat the history of the last war. When the declaration of war was made in 1917, originally it was intended to send only the Navy to the assistance of the Allies. You didn't know that, did you? World War I, it was only just supposed to be naval ships. Manpower 2. Joffre, Joffre, came over in the spring of 1917, told the plight of the French army after the 1917 spring Champagne offense, where whole divisions of the French army mutinied, and implored us to send over a token force, otherwise France would collapse. Well, hell, if all the people in France mutinied, let it collapse. We sent Pershing in the 1st Division, about 30,000 men. Then came the impending collapse of Russia, frantic calls for more men, then the great German offense of 1918 and the rout of the British Fifth Army, more frantic appeals, until finally we put under arms 4 million men, sent 2 million men to France, spent $20 billion, and had 150,000 casualties. I need not refer to our treatment by our former allies after the armistice. They took the loot. We did not even get a thanks. In other words, we got it up the backside and we didn't even get a kiss. Learn from history. Don't forget about it. That's why we're here now, dealing with what we're dealing with. Because too many people thought history is irrelevant. It's never irrelevant. Because we keep repeating the same patterns of behavior. It's human nature. Humans are creatures of habit. I do not often agree with the editorials on foreign policy in my friend Frank Knox's paper, but there is a recent editorial with which I agree 100%. The editorial quoted 2 recent speeches by both presidential candidates in which both pledged themselves never to send American boys to France. The editorial spoke of both these pledges as political bunk and very truly stated that if we entered the war, we would enter it to win, and if necessary to win, we would send an expeditionary force, and that is the absolute truth. The people must know the truth. The issue should be honestly presented to the people. If we aid Britain short of war and beyond the limits of the Neutrality Act, it ultimately means war and should mean war. If we enter the war, we must enter it with all our strength and men and money. That is the only way to win a war. Well, remember the Lithuania. The Lithuania was sunk by a U-2 sub because it was known to be carrying munitions in its hold. In fact, the German embassy went up and down the eastern seaboard posting notices before the ship even set sail for American citizens to stay off of it because they knew the munitions were being carried in its hold. And what happens? One torpedo, massive explosions, breaks its back. Oh, they didn't tell you all that. They just told you about the loss of American lives. All right. If the military reports from abroad are correct, I feel there is no doubt that Great Britain can defend her island, her dominions like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. She may lose Egypt, the Suez, and Gibraltar, although that is extremely doubtful. So far, the Italian has shown no signs of real offensive strength. There is little doubt that England can make a negotiated peace by which she can keep her fleet and her colonies, but which will leave Germany the economic control of Western Europe. But she cannot decisively defeat Germany unaided. Her statesmen publicly admit that and say that for her to gain decisive victory, we will have to actively enter the war. Well, don't forget the Balfour Agreement, where the British government sent a letter to Rothschild saying, yes, we'll give you Palestine. World War II was to break up the Ottoman Empire that was left and to ensure British control over Palestine so they could hand it to Rothschild. It's still in his name. Oh, I think he actually gave it to the Vatican, I think. Ain't that a kick in the butt?